This video explores the connection between leadership, spirituality, and religion, and the role of spirituality and religion in leaders' lives, including common practices for maintaining work-life balance and leading with values and purpose. It also includes examples of spiritual theories of leadership and insight on interacting and leading in a diverse workplace.
The increasing globalization of the workplace, which brings about much more interaction among very diverse groups of people, really has led to an increased attention to the intersection of spirituality and leadership.
We interviewed a number of experts in leadership, spirituality, and religion to get their insights on these key topics.
Ian Mitroff, back at the turn of the century, indicated that 88% of leaders felt they couldn't be an effective senior leader without a deeply calibrated spiritual compass. That spirituality mattered. And that statistic doesn't change in my courses, in my research, in working across industries.
We've seen over the last couple of decades a real rise in spirituality and religion in the workplace. Employees have always brought their whole person to the workplace, but as we see an increasingly diverse workforce, as we see people coming with different experiences, whether they're religious, spiritual, faith-based, secular, that diversity is showing itself more and more.
We spend, half or more of our waking life at work. That we all have a need for a sense of our lives making a difference, and in doing so, our life has meaning.
So then, as I developed a career, it seemed to me that organizations had a major role in what kind of lives people lived. So the first thought was organizations change. How do you create organizations that are good places to work, that serve good purposes? And that's what led me to leadership.
As we became interested in the topic of spirituality, religion, and leadership, we decided to do a survey with students to find out about the connections that they saw between these three concepts.
We surveyed a group of graduate leadership and management students in the U.S., and about 80% of them said that their personal belief systems related to religion and spirituality were an important part of their being a leader.
I think it's important for students to prepare themselves for leadership roles with diverse constituents. Part of this means developing one's own religious literacy, learning about their own tradition but other traditions as well, and also studying leadership. What makes for effective leadership, how leaders and followers interact in a particular context to make change.
Religions are typically traditional systems of belief and practice, including rituals and ceremonies, and may include belief in God or gods. Spirituality centers around a search for meaning in life and may be connected to religion, or it may be separate from any religion. Spirituality emphasizes questions like, how do we understand the purpose of our lives, and how do we connect with the bigger picture of the world and the lives of others? The two concepts overlap for many people, but some people may see themselves as spiritual but not religious.
Being spiritual means sensing the interconnectedness of life and the interdependence of all our actions.
As many definitions of leadership as there are leaders. Well, the same is true for spirituality. Each individual in and of themselves has a sense of their spirituality, a sense of self-transcendence, moving beyond self, and also connection or union with the whole, or the non-dual, or a higher power, or God, that there's a sense of oneness, and that can manifest in a lot of ways. And that has really been essential in our definition of workplace spirituality, of how that moves into the workplace.
As the evolution of spiritual-based discussion, the discussion of values, the discussion of deep self, becomes more public and is valued more, people can engage in those conversations without referencing their tradition. For most people, those values, that deep inner self, is related to a worldview that flows from a religious or non-religious background.
Let's just say this isn't now, and it's in some place where we don't interconnect so much. I live in my town, and you live in yours. We never see one another, and I'm the leader of mine, you're the leader of yours. It's all good. But in today's world, we bump into one another, and then people start saying, oh, you know, his must be wrong, mine must be right. And I think that's where things get into trouble with religion.
There's also, again, the warning sign that religion could be divisive. And so people are trying to find their way. I don't think there's great security.
Underlying the world's spiritual and religious traditions is essentially love and service of others. And so this is really what the field has captured, even though it's early and emerging, and is certainly central to our work on spiritual leadership.
Leaders in the workplace are sometimes afraid to talk about religion. They see it as taboo, something that they dare not address because of questions of church and state or questions of law and religion. And so sometimes they steer wide of that.
There's great concern about the separation of church and organization. And if you think about societal institutions, the corporation has probably been the most successful at bringing people from many diverse cultures and religious traditions into a mission-driven setting, and been successful in melding people together around something that matters. And so there's a concern that success story not all of a sudden become distorted by an inappropriate tension around religious differences.
Some people will say that religion should stay clear of the workplace, but if you have employees in the workplace, you have religion in the workplace. And so the question isn't to avoid it or not, the question is how you manage it, because religious expression and religious diversity is present. Often when religion in the workplace makes the news, it's because a leader has abused his or her authority by trying to impose his or her faith on followers.
We accept dialogue around spirituality, but we're cautious about the overt introduction of religion is sort of the present position that most organizations would ascribe to.
People are able to bring their faith into the workplace in appropriate ways, and it should not be a subject that people avoid.
As we spend more time in the workplace, and as we're so connected, we have this sense of alienation. And so there's this rise and it mostly is often unconscious or unspoken, but it's this sense of restlessness inside that we feel when we are not satisfying those needs. And it's harder and harder to do that away from work.
You know, the knowledge worker gives their whole self, their imagination, their emotions, their time commitment, not only their time commitment, but enormous stresses on their family. They're just completely, totally personally involved. And it's exciting, but it also can lead to being burned out and frustrated because of all that intensity. And it isn't worth doing unless you can ascribe to all that endeavor purpose and meaning that's significant.
First is the need for calling or purpose. And so this is an inherent spiritual need that we all have. And then the other fundamental need is the need for membership or belonging or a sense of community by which we feel connected. I mean, we're social animals.
Especially in large organizations, it's hard for leaders to get to know all of their employees, and sometimes they can be seen as distant merely because they don't have time to communicate or to be present with all of their employees. So I talk about leadership by showing up, being present in the workplace, getting to know people across different levels of the institution.
And so this sense of we're understood and we're appreciated and unconditionally accepted for who we are. Inherent in workplace spirituality is this idea of transcendence of self, or hope and faith and service to key stakeholders through values based in altruistic love, or care and concern, appreciation. To the extent you're able to satisfy these needs in the workplace, well, then some pretty magical things happen in terms of individual and organizational outcomes. We have consistent, replicated results that if you satisfy these needs at work, it predicts between 60 and 80% of variance in organizational commitment, which really, if you look at the literature on organizational commitment, it drives everything else in the organization. It drives continuous improvement, which then leads to higher quality products and services, which then lead to more satisfied customers and satisfied stakeholders, and then guess what? We make money. For many years, organizational development has been into employee well-being, 60, 70 years, and of course, profits has been at the center of it since the beginning. But the sustainability aspect is what's new. How can you have a sustainable planet and what goes with that unless you care about it and you're willing to sacrifice for it? And so that is the key part of the triple bottom line. And so the question then becomes, what leadership is necessary or effective if we're going to somehow achieve this balance of these conflicting stakeholders and maximize those in concert? So that's your triple bottom line, and of course that is the name of our book, is Maximizing the Triple Bottom Line Through Spiritual Leadership, so we make that case.
The workplace today is more diverse than ever. The American workplace reflects the world, and so in the world we have so many different traditions of faith, religion, spirituality. And so leaders who are attuned to these issues are more able to be in tune with their employees and understand how that diversity might affect interrelations among workers and what workers themselves care about.
You know, we don't need another country club that certain people belong to and others don't. So if you're a Catholic healthcare system, you don't want a group of senior Catholic executives somehow going off to their services and expressing their spirituality in the Catholic chapel, where the Jewish and Hindu and Muslim physicians and leaders are separated.
Leaders don't just privilege their own practices over others, that they need to be willing to understand and learn from coworkers who have faith from different perspectives. And so I think that's an important aspect of leadership and religion in the workplace. It's that all perspectives are welcome and that no one is privileged.
That's a real challenge for faith-based organizations. It's a real challenge for organizations who are in regions of the country in which a particular religious expression is very dominant.
No one of us, whether we're a mid-level manager or a high-level leader, starts from some objective position. We all have our fundamental value commitments. We all have our perspectives on religion, faith, and spirituality. One of the questions as we're moving through an organization is to think about how we'll live out our faith. Just because we say faith and spiritual expression is welcome in the workplace doesn't mean that everyone will choose to exercise that possibility. Some are more comfortable being more private. Other faith expressions, including through dress, through speech, through one's holiday practices, don't have the option of leaving their faith at home.
There's the right place for us to gather with our faith community, but the organization has to be a multi-religiously plural expression, and that would include secular humanists and secular scientific perspectives.
So if we think about religious pluralism in the workplace, we would have a presumption that religious and spiritual expressions are welcome, but there would be certain caveats. Religious and spiritual expressions welcome until they coerce coworkers or subordinates, until they degrade coworkers and subordinates, and until an institution were to effectively establish one religion, that is, privilege in an institutional way, one religion over the other.
So if you're going to use reading, passage meditation and readings as a prelude, the readings need to be from multiple traditions. There needs to be prayer and celebration referencing all the traditions present. And then since I've referenced the other traditions, I'm very comfortable saying, in my own tradition, we think. So actually it gives me freedom to speak much more overtly.
Leaders should think not about avoiding religion or other personal commitments, but they should think about how you create an environment of mutual respect where people are comfortable on their own terms.
In 1999, I was teaching a leadership course, and for the first time I had this book, and I was going through it, and it said, for organizations to be successful, they have to generate hope and faith in a vision, and they have to lead from love, not fear. And so here we are, hope, faith, and love in a management book.
50 to 70% of the time, strategic decisions, the most important, the most complex decision challenges leaders face, that those decision processes fail. And they fail largely because of not an absence of information or an absence of analytics, but a lack of spiritual and psychological maturity on the part of the people engaged in the decision making. It's a impatience and unwillingness to explore all the dimensions of the problem, insufficient ability to be sensitive to alternate voices.
And so when we're talking about religion and faith, that means that leaders might listen and understand what values their employees care about, and perhaps how they think about these questions.
The problems that come to a leader are the ones that seem unsolvable, covered with emotional and political intrigue, have great uncertainty, and then involve a discovery process. You can't do that if you're anxious, fearful, self-centered, impetuous, authoritarian. So if you're a moral dwarf, it's unlikely you're going to be a successful senior executive. And so spiritual maturity makes a difference.
Well, what does leadership look like that can satisfy these needs? Hope, faith, and service to key stakeholders through altruistic love that satisfies fundamental needs for purpose and belonging, which result in higher levels of commitment, productivity, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability, which we call people, planet, and profit, or the triple bottom line. I've just defined for you spiritual leadership. That's what spiritual leadership is. We talk about it in depth in our initial paper that we published in 2003 on the theory in Leadership Quarterly. It really came out of our work on looking at spirituality and religion and how they're similar and how they're different. But the bridge between spirituality and religion is the rule of the ethics of reciprocity, or the golden rule. All major religions have a golden rule. Our definition, or the way we approach altruistic love, are the values inherent of serving and loving others, which is couched in the do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And then we talk about the values that underlie that, such as honesty, integrity, compassion, kindness, courage, humility is very important. There must be some sort of inner life or going inward type practice from which one draws strength.
A great many of them have a personal practice, whether they label it spiritual, whether it's a religious one or not, whether it's running in the morning or walking or meditating or breath awareness.
You can't will yourself into patience. You can't will yourself into deep listening. You can't will yourself into calmness following an upsetting event. And so it's practice in which the growth has to occur. So you can study spirituality like sailing, but if you've never been on a boat, never felt the tides, never felt the wind, it's all abstract and you don't get there.
So the more that leaders can have practices that help them feel interconnected with other people, and also that let them feel confident that they are making the right choices when others around them may not agree. And I find that Practices like breath awareness, meditation, sensing interconnection with other beings really help with that.
So we know now through very, very robust neuroscience evidence that meditation allows you not to get hooked on false emotions, allows you to step away from impatience, allows you to focus, allows you to pay attention and be present to people in a different way.
Inner life practice, and it begins with mindfulness, which is very popular now, and you see being adopted more and more by Goldman Sachs, Silicon Valley, because it also leads to higher performance. I mean, that's the so what question. I mean, who cares about this? If you're in a college of business, there's always the so what. This is nice, and it should be, and absolutely it's important. But so what? Well, triple bottom line, more present, more effective, judgment's not clouded by anger, resentment, worry, and fear.
Otto Scharmer, who's doing very interesting work with presence, he doesn't label it spirituality, he calls it presencing. But Theory U, the picture of going down a curve into the depths of oneself and then quickly up the other side, able to act more. And so coming out of a downloading approach to life where you're kind of going, yeah, I know that, oh, okay, heard that already. Going into really considering in one's heart, what is happening here? What can I do about it? And having that free up new sources of creativity and potential, doing that as an individual, doing it in small groups, doing it in corporations, doing it in communities. It's not having a set of beliefs that does it. It's having a practice that over and over again, weekly, if not daily, grounds one in one's own humanity.
We know the practice, the famous practice that Ignatius calls the examen, that others talk about as end-of-the-day reflection. That if you replay the events of the day, and you replay them to see where there's been beauty and goodness and truth, and you also replay them to see where there's been mischief and darkness, and then being aware of that but not attached to it. If you can commend that to the mystery that bears 1,000 names, then you can enter the next day not carrying all that baggage, having learned from it but not being beholden to it.
To me, spiritual practices are what let a person talk with other people about things where they feel like they're in competition, where they feel that there's a scarcity. It's what reminds us that what the Dalai Lama always says is, we are same. And he'll speak to a crowd of 10,000, of 20,000 and say, we are same. And he means it.
There are a few practices that my cadre of leaders in Silicon Valley see as absolutely central. One is some form of silent meditation, whether it's Vipassana or mindfulness in the Buddhist tradition, or centering prayer, the Jesus prayer in the Christian traditions, or Kabbalah meditation in the Jewish tradition, or Sufi meditation in the Muslim tradition.
I have my students do a little exercise. First, I have them close their eyes, and I say, think of a recent time when you were angry or resentful. Think about that situation. Wasn't there an expectation that was not being met at the heart of that resentment? Somebody didn't do as you expected. And they go, oh, yeah. I say, well, okay, now close your eyes again. I say, now think of a time recently when you were worried or perhaps in fear. And so we've got to open your eyes. Okay, now if you think about that situation, isn't it true that that worry, that fear was based in an expectation that you would lose something you hold dear or you wouldn't get something you really want? They go, oh yeah. I said, well, the interesting aspect of this is that anger and resentment is in the past. It's based on expectations in situations in the past where they weren't met. And worry and fear is based in the future on expectations of loss. Where are you not? And they go, well, we're not in the moment. We're not in the now. I said, well, what do the past and the future exist? And they go, no. And I say, okay, well then it makes sense Doesn't it make sense that if you're in anger, resentment, or worry and fear, you're going to be less effective as a leader? And the light bulb goes off.
Presence or threshold meditation. That before the next phone call or before the next meeting, that they stop and they let go of all the other pressures and activities, so that when they pick up that phone, they are truly present to the person they're calling. When they enter the meeting with the new employees, they aren't dealing with the budget conference that they just left. And so it's the capacity to enter the beginner's mind and to be present to the next event in a centered way.
I'm not an advocate of meditation just to be calm. I don't see it at all as a way of merely stress relief, although stress relief is important, but to be awake to oneself, to other people, to the consequences of one's actions. To me, that's what's important.
At present, the average senior executive has 62 encounters in a day because they're meeting with a lot of autocracy, task force, temporary groups, committee chairs, various stakeholder constituencies. And you just can't, there's no ability to hold 62 different encounters in the same pool. What you have to do is to make each of those encounters particular to its purpose and its function. And so the practice of threshold meditation is very important.
I basically introduced them to Jack Kornfield's Meditation for Beginners. And in there he has 6 simple meditations, and we focus on the breathing meditation. And he makes a point in there that this breathing meditation is common to the spiritual and religious tradition, so it's not specific to any particular tradition. And that's basically what I do on a daily basis too, is a simple breathing meditation. Now, if I'm working with a Christian organization or people from the Christian tradition, I introduce them to or suggest the work on contemplative prayer by Father Thomas Keating, which is really an evolution of a basic breathing meditation.
The last practice I would mention is that the executives that I work with learn to cherish spiritual reading. They read from scriptures of their tradition, or they read the great holy writings of saints and wisdom figures in their tradition. And they intuit the practice of Lectio Divina, or what Eshkerawan talks about, passage meditation. If they read a paragraph, and they find the paragraph in the 2 pages that's their paragraph, and they think about that and ask, why am I drawn to that particular paragraph? What is that saying to me in my present life adventure?
I can't stress enough the importance of a personal mission statement and actually going through that and making it a living document. Those are 2 key aspects: committing to the spiritual journey and becoming present and mindful, because that's where it flows from.
The great traditions indicate that the spiritual journey opens you to receive. It's not something you achieve. It's not another exercise program that you have to do the heavy lifting. It's quite the opposite in the great traditions. It's you position yourself to receive blessings and insights and the capacity to live your life in a different way.
That we don't have to go into a room and say, well, we're going to do organizational spiritual leadership, or even we're going to create a vision. It's going to be based in a set of values. All you have to do is engage in and seek an area in need of a solution and create a vision, co-create a vision for that, and then operate through that vision to generate hope and faith in yourself and your people, and in effect you're living spiritual leadership without ever saying the word.
Because it's also so easy to get caught up in oneself or serious about it, and I think it's so important to have a sense of perspective and humor and lightness.
Remember, If you have employees in your workplace, you have religion and spirituality in that workplace. So understanding how you work with diverse employees requires you to understand how religion, faith, spirituality, values operate there. You want to get to know your employees, you want to help them to work together, and part of doing that means to be religiously and spiritually literate. It means to think about interpersonal dynamics, and it means not to be afraid to invite people to express themselves as long as they uphold mutual respect for one another.
Thank you for joining us for this brief video on the intersection of spirituality, religion, and leadership.
We hope that this video has stimulated your interest in this topic and that it will contribute to your growth and development as a leader.